Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verses 28 through 31, says this: it's God's most important command. One of the legal experts heard their dispute and saw how well Jesus answered them, and he came over and asked him, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" Jesus replied, "The most important is, Israel, listen. Our God is one Lord, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you will love your neighbor as yourself. No commandment is greater than these." 800 South Mint Street is the address of the stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the Panthers play. A Lowe's hardware store came up with an excellent ad for post-COVID football fans, highlighting that the Panthers stadium was empty. The ad encourages not to discount other 800 Mint Streets across the country, meaning homes of individuals, other fans. The ad is to encourage you to stay home while you're there, make some home improvements, buy your stuff at Lowe's. And the title of this campaign is Home Team at Home.
800 South Mint Street may not be quite as full, but don't count out all 800 Mint Streets just yet, even though this one needs an expansion. And this one, some added security. For these groundskeepers,
Shield, game!
for the fans at home,
Christian, you've done it again.
for all of us, we'll be working together to put the home in Home Team.
And there are plenty of other ads in the campaign, but this ad tugs at your heart, doesn't it? Well, at least it tugs at mine, and that's what it's meant to do. The creatives that came up with this understand something about deep human connection. The Chiefs, the Broncos, the Bears, and the Bucks. On the field, they're competitors. But these fans, they all live at the same address, 800 Mint Street. And that fact may seem strange and arbitrary, but in a way it unites them. This ad is half a minute long, but it gets at me. Not just because I love football, but because I'm sore every day about this divided country we live in. And I long to the depths of my heart to find our common ground, and if it's something as simple as an address. That's why I chose Tom Berlin's book, Reckless Love, to guide the sermon series at the beginning of 2021. Because if there's anything we need in the world today, it's love. And it's God's love. And when I planned to preach on this, I didn't know how important this topic of loving one's neighbor in 2021 would end up being. I, like many of you, watched in disbelief and confusion as news reports came in of a group of people attacking the U.S. Capitol. It gets to you emotionally, and maybe that's part of the intention of the way things are reported by the news media, but I really wanted to hear from those who were inside and what they went through and how they would lead our nation, the members of Congress, after the events. And so I listened to the senators one by one, and I heard one of them say, "Love your neighbor." Not just once. It was Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska. And this is some of what he said. He said, God gives us rights by nature, not by might. And our government is just our shared project to protect those rights. He said the center of America is not Washington, D.C., or even this Capitol. The center of America is in neighborhoods where 330 million Americans are trying to raise their kids, put food on the table, and love their neighbor. He said that's what's the center of America. And he also said that we can't do big things together if we hate our neighbor. We can't do big things together as Americans if we think other Americans are our enemy. So his advice to Americans was to organize, to persuade, to not use violence, but most importantly, he said, love your neighbor. He even suggested you visit the widower down the road who's lonely, or that you shovel somebody else's driveway. You can't hate somebody who just shoveled your driveway, the senator said. I can't say I disagree with this senator. And I know that some of you are Democrats. They'll be angry at me for quoting a Republican in my sermon. And others of you who are staunch supporters of the president will be just as mad because you know that Sass has been one of his biggest critics from his same side of the aisle. And I'm really not trying to make you happy. I'm trying to say that the gospel was on the lips of one of our nation's leaders when there was fear for themselves and their staff and their fellow senators. I'm trying to say that terms like servant leader made it into the speeches and made me proud to be an American. And you can promote peace and you can condemn violence, but when you say love your neighbor, that's the heart of the gospel. And it's not easy. And it's as simple as shoveling someone's driveway. Yeah, I know, I said it. This sermon's not just a message to make you feel spiritual and comforted. This is the marching orders. It's the beginning of the marching orders to love your neighbor, the hardest ones to love. The ones that judge you unfairly, the ones that seem to care only for themselves, the ones who always have to be first, the ones that leave their trash cans out for days and let their dogs defecate on your yard. Yes, folks, I have neighbors too. This point that Tom Berlin is making in his book, Reckless Love, in this first chapter, is that to begin with love is not so easy, but it's also simple. It's easy to think, he says, that if we learn to love God deeply enough, heart, soul, and mind, then loving our neighbor will be accomplished through the overflow of that relationship with God. And there's truth to this idea. Few things can help us love our neighbor like the transformation of heart that is found when we learn to love God by accepting the forgiveness that Jesus Christ gives us for our sins and following him as a disciple. But that's only part of it. Because it is only when we commit to love our neighbors and intentionally accomplish that goal that we learn what it means to fully love God. So it goes hand in hand. The reason is that nothing reveals what keeps us from fully loving God, Berlin says, and knowing God in the likeness of Christ, like attempting to love our neighbor. And that's why these two commandments, Jesus puts them together when he's questioned. They are listed together in the gospel because they go together. Berlin quotes Barbara Van Taylor from her book, Altering the World. She said, the hardest spiritual work in the world is to love the neighbor as the self. To encounter another human being, not as someone you can use, change, fix, help, save, enroll, convince, control, but simply someone who can spring you from the prison of yourself if you will allow it. Not a person you can use, convince, or control, but a person that if you love them can spring you from the prison of yourself. Loving God, loving neighbor, going hand in hand. In these difficult times that have just gotten difficulter, is that a word? Probably not. More difficult. Love neighbor. Love for neighbor. Jesus said it, and it is a pattern that you can see in your own life of discipleship. We have more in common than our differences. And I hope that as you go throughout the coming days and witness what you'll witness and talk to whom you'll talk to, you'll remember that sense of loving neighbor. And it's as simple as, like the senator said, just shovel someone's driveway. They can't hate you after you've just shoveled their driveway. Those are kind acts, but think about it even when you're driving around and you're using your blinker. I know, simple, right? If you intentionally think about using your blinker as a message to the drivers around you of courtesy and kindness to say, I'm going right or I'm going left, instead of just following the rules that you're supposed to use your blinker or protecting your own self, I guarantee you this love of neighbor will grow from practices like that. Berlin goes on in his first chapter to say that this love is a verb. It's something we actually do. We need to put it into practice. It is a spiritual practice. And so, if we can find ways materially, like the senator suggested, visit a widower or shovel someone's driveway, and I'm sure you can think of other things that you could do to love your neighbor. Even just forgiving your neighbor when you witness something foul, like not picking up the dog mess, just to forgive at that moment. Just to take a step back and say, we're never going to get through this unless we love one another. Be the example. These are the marching orders. Love your neighbor. Love God. God bless you.